All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about a super handy shortcut for real estate investors, a tool that helps you size up a property's value in just a few seconds.
So picture this. You found a rental property that looks promising. How do you know, right then and there, if the price is even in the right zip code? You don't want to get bogged down in a crazy spreadsheet just yet, right?
Well, lucky for us, there's a tool for exactly that. It's called the Gross Rent Multiplier, or GRM for short. And yeah, it's your new best friend for a quick first look.
So what is it really? It's pretty simple. The GRM is basically a quick and dirty way to connect a property's price to the total rent it can pull in over a year. And the key word here is gross rent, before you take out a single penny for expenses. And you know, this isn't just some dry formula. It's actually a pretty cool way to take the market's temperature. It's asking a really simple but powerful question. How many years of rent are people willing to pay for a place like this? That's what it boils down to. Okay, so theory is great, but how do you actually use this thing? Let's get into the calculation. And don't worry, it's so easy you could seriously do it on the back of a napkin.
It really just comes down to two simple steps. First, you've got to figure out the market GRM. You do that by looking at what similar places nearby sold for and what their annual rent was. Then, step two, you just take that multiplier and slap it onto the annual rent of the property you're eyeing. So to get that market GRM, an appraiser will pull up some recent sales of comparable properties. We call them comps. For each one, they just take the sale price and divide it by the total annual rent. And what you usually see is that the GRMs for these different properties start to bunch up around the same number.
Right, so after looking at all those comps, the appraiser does what's called reconciling them. They basically just pick one number that feels like the best representation of the market. And in our example here, that magic number is 1050. And here's where the magic happens. You take your property's gross annual rent, which is $864,000 here, and you multiply it by that market GRM of 1050. Boom! Just like that, you've got a quick valuation of just over $9 million.
I know what you're thinking. That seems way too easy, right? A simple multiplication and you know what a property is worth? Well, yeah. And that's because this incredibly handy shortcut has a massive, and I mean massive blind spot.
And this, right here, is probably the most important thing to understand about the GRM. So, what is this simple, elegant formula totally forgetting to look at? Okay, here's the catch. The GRM is all about gross rent. That means it completely ignores every single cost of owning that property. We're talking repairs, property taxes, insurance, management fees. Heck, it doesn't even account for the fact that you might have a vacancy and no rent coming in at all. And this is a huge deal. Why? Because you could have two properties that bring in the exact same rent. With GRM, they look identical. But what if one is a brand new building and the other is an old money pit that needs constant work? Their actual profit, the money you put in your pocket, could be worlds apart.
Now, hearing all that, you might be tempted to just toss this tool in the trash, but don't. Understanding its weakness is actually the key to using it wisely. So let's put the GRM in its proper place.
A really good way to get a feel for the GRM is to put it side by side with a more detailed tool called the Capitalization Rate, or cap rate. The big difference is right there in what they measure. GRM looks at gross income before costs. A cap rate looks at net operating income, which is your income after you pay all the bills. So think of it this way. GRM is built for speed, cap rate is built for accuracy.
So let's break it down. Pros and cons. The advantages? It's super simple and fast, and the data you need is pretty easy to get your hands on. The limitations? Well, it ignores all those expenses we talked about. It doesn't care about vacancies, and it gets pretty shaky when you're looking at more complex properties.
Okay, so what's the bottom line here? When should you actually pull this tool out of your toolbox, and how do you make sure you don't get tripped up by its flaws?
Here's the deal. GRM is at its best when you are truly comparing apples to apples. We're talking about small residential properties, duplexes, fourplexes, that are all in the same neighborhood. Why? Because in those situations, the operating costs are probably going to be pretty similar from one building to the next, which makes the GRM a much more reliable starting point.
Listen, the absolute biggest mistake you can make is to use the GRM and stop there. It is not the final word. It's just a screening tool. And another thing, don't just assume a lower GRM is always a better deal. It could just be a red flag for a property with crazy high expenses.
So here's how you should think about it. The GRM is like a screening test. It's that first, quick calculation that helps you sort through a bunch of listings and decide which ones are even worth digging into.
It helps you decide which properties deserve you popping the hood and taking a much closer look.
And that really brings us to the final point. The gross rent multiplier, it's fantastic for getting a quick feel for a property's price. But as an investor, you're not just playing for price, are you? You're playing for profit. And to understand the profit, you've got to look past the top-line number and dig into the nitty-gritty expenses that really tell the whole story.